Magnus Carlsen is widely regarded as the best chess player in the world, but we frequently see him only challenged by other super grandmasters. What would happen if you put Magnus Carlsen against one of the best chess prodigies in the world, or what about 20 of them? You see, Chess24 organized a tour where they took some of the best chess prodigies, aged anywhere between like 11, 12, and 21 years old, and they put them on separate teams to compete against each other. And then what they did is they made like a challengers match, where you have one designated target super GM, and all of these players just go one by one, David versus Goliath, in 3-minute blitz games. So Magnus Carlsen played 20 of them a few weeks ago, and in this video, I'm going to take you through some of the most fun games, showing you different elements of his playing style, as well as some of the games where he lost, and we'll look at the final standings at the end. Timestamps on the video player, you guys know how this works. So first game against Yalia Sokolovsky, 2440 rated prodigy. This player is from Israel, and we have a Sicilian defense by Magnus Carlsen. Magnus was playing everything. He was playing e4, e5, he was playing the Scandinavian defense, mixing it up. So we have Sicilian, knight f3, e6, and we have the Khan. This is a e6, a6 setup, and oftentimes white will put the queen on c7, play a knight to c6, or play b5 and bishop b7. It's a very, very good Sicilian defense, but white plays c4. And so c4 immediately kind of tells black, like, look, I'm looking to put my knight behind the pawn and really suppress a lot of your pawn movement in the center. So normally what ends up happening is black changes the setup. Black plays knight f6, and then still plays the queen to c7, but then plays b6, because obviously you cannot put the bishop here. I mean, the pawn here, you obviously will put the bishop here. That's exactly what we have. And white plays this in a very unique pawn structure style, right? With b3, c4, e4, f3, light squared blockade, completely shutting down everything here. But folks, when you put 6 pawns of your 7 pawns on light squares, that means that your dark square complex is going to be a little bit soft, and one of the knights should be able to go here. And in many of these positions, if black is still able to successfully make this pawn break, white is going to be in trouble. So Magnus plays bishop to e7, and white normally has either played rook to c1, or has a queen on d2, but since white already played queen d3, white is obviously not going to go back to d2, white decides to play g4. Basically saying, well, if you castle, I'm going to attack you, and Magnus Carlsen says, I'm Magnus Carlsen, dude. Bring it on. Short castle. g5, what's worth more than a knight? A queen. Knight e5. And sorry if you were like, oh, me. Well, you too. Queen d2, knight d7, f4. What is Magnus doing? I mean, he's kind of gone headfirst into the fire. The knight has no forward moves. So the knight decides to go back to c6. But as you bait more and more of white's pawns forward, white has to be very precise. Like right now, white's best move is probably to just retreat from the action and just continue to very slowly build up an attack. And the computer likes this position very much for white. But then it starts to think a little bit, and it's like, black actually has some pretty good opportunities. Even though white has set up everything to suppress these breaks, black will be able to make them because white is so overextended. That's the term that we use. And you see that in action right here. This is a very bold move, long castle. So castled on opposite sides, what do you do, folks? I've been setting it up the entire video. b5. A move that is covered 4 times by white. Pawn, 2 knights, and bishop. Doesn't matter, because after takes, I can take, but that allows this knight to come here, so I throw in the Zwischenzug. I take on d4, and then no matter what you do, you have a problem. I can play a takes b5, and Magnus Carlsen decides not even to do that. He decides to take here, and this just shows you the problem with going long castle into the Khan setup, the Paulsen Khan. Very, very dangerous. Rook g1 to get the rook out of the way. Now we take back on b5. Now, in many cases like this, the right decision is not to take, because even though, I mean, you can take with the bishop, the best thing is probably to just get out of the pin, king b2, king b1 ideally, but you can't do that. Instead, he does this, and Magnus does not need another excuse. It's a really nice move here from Magnus. It's actually kind of funny how powerful this one simple move is. You can feel free to pause here and try to find it. This move is like, you know in Kingsman, the movie? Where the guy walks to the end of the bar and like shuts it and like locks the door and says manners maketh man, and then beats everybody up. Yeah, so that's what Magnus does here. He basically plays this move, and now everything is locked. The bishop is open, the queen is open, the knight is going to jump in one of these directions, and it's over. no matter what black does. And the execution is very swift, and it's very deadly, and Yali probably needs medical attention after this. Bishop to a3 check. The king rides away to the corner. And I mean, Magnus plays a decent move, but he has an even better one. He plays knight c5. Knight c5 is the best move. With a really nasty threat. Knight takes b3, a b3, and bishop c1. Just winning the queen. You can block, but it's over. It's very bad. It's all over. Instead, he plays bishop b4, which is also fine. White has, you know, a counter shot to take the knight, to just ignore the entire attack and take the knight. And yeah, instead he goes back. And now knight c5, bishop c2, queen a5. Everything rolls forward. Rook b8, the final piece. Like, hey, what about me? I'm the only one not playing. The king doesn't care. King's lazy. He's like, y'all go do your thing. And now the entire house collapses. We throw the Molotov cocktails in. Man, Magnus Carlsen had everything this game. The Molotov cocktails, the medical attention. Bang! Bang! Take it all down. Bang! Take on b3. You can only take with the rook. He plays king b2. I mean, if you take like this, I play queen a4. You're going to lose no matter what. You know what? I should show you all what I mean by that. Because it's actually, like, if king b2, you play the very nice queen a3. And, I mean, you can also play, like, queen a2 and go here and just be up a rook for the bishop, but with a lot of pawns, you have this very nice move. And then you have this, and if they go here, you have mate. It's all covered, so knight b3, king b2, and Yali decided I've had enough. I'm calling it a day right here. So a very nice win. Magnus with the black pieces, beautiful Sicilian. He doesn't even play the Khan against some of these, you know, super GMs, but it doesn't matter. He executes that in very nice style. Now, his next two games are Magnesian, as I like to call them, which is not a word, but I might as well patent that word because I'm kind of the only one that I've ever heard use it, I think. Magnesian means just surgical. Like, so this is an e4, e5, and he's playing Zhansaya Abdumalik, who I made a video about recently. She's the world's newest grandmaster, and he plays this d3. So a6, knight f6 is one of the main ways to play against the Ruy Lopez, but d3 is a bit unique. Normally, white is playing for d4, and Magnus plays like this with an early a4. Whatever. I mean, it's blitz, right? Like, you play anything. Bishop b7, because if otherwise you allowed this capture, you would have lost the rook. So now the rook is protected. Both sides set up. Bishop d2 is designed to counteract knight a5. And now castles, knight c3, and you allow it, but now the knight is a target. So black needs to worry about different knight jumps to the middle that would then target the knight on d5, which is why black plays this move, and then this move. You see, chess is a very logical game. However, in making this decision to counteract this, black has now put a bunch of pawns on the dark squares, and just like last game, that means that light squared weaknesses in the center of the board, right? But Magnus rotates the knight around over here to fight for this light squared weakness, so that bishop goes back to fight for the light squared weakness that black has. I told you, it's just a logical game. So what does Magnus do? He goes back to this bishop d2 situation, plays c3, makes a little... Oops, I knocked over one of my... I've got these kings here that I used for a thumbnail. Knight goes back to c6. Now, previously there had been a game 21 years ago. I didn't just know that. It's in the annotations for the game that went like this. But we have this position, and now we begin the Magnesian play, okay? Now is where it gets impressive. First, he makes this trade. Now we say, don't trade bishop for knight unless you have a good reason. Well, he removes his dark squared attacker, but he gets rid of one of the two pieces, that knight, except this bishop, right? So the knight, and the bishop that could fight for the light squares. Now Magnus has three pieces that could fight for the light squares, two knights and a bishop. This bishop cannot fight for the light squares. Now he plays rook c1, bishop e6, and he takes. So we both remove a light squared attacker, but you have a target. I am now going to get that target. And when you go defend, I can go knight g5, but then you will go d5, and you'll block out my queen. And by the way, you might be wondering, why didn't Magnus take this pawn? Well, Magnus, this pawn is actually a nice shield. If he takes this pawn, he will have to absorb a ton of counterplay on the b file. He's going to get rolled here. And maybe he's fine. He might be completely fine, but it's a little bit more human, if you will, to play this move, d4. And the point is, again, that you're just crashing through down the middle. Like, this pawn will stay a weakness. So Magnus keeps the weakness there and instead cashes in on the more immediate weakness in the position. Magnesian, yeah? You have to make this trade for black, otherwise you'd get taken, so takes. Hello, who guards this? Oh, d5? Oh, d5. Okay, great. Well, now I'm going to go full Magnus. Knight jumps into c6, pressuring this, threatening to jump back to e5, pressuring this pawn, but not always, because again, this pin is still there. The best move is probably to try to kick me out, but it's not easy to do that. So I play a5 to lock up the position. Now I play e5. So I've made a bunch of forward moves, right? Okay, h3, kick your knight back. And now knight e2 to rotate around the knight this way, glue the knights together, and pressure the e6 pawn. Also f4, g4 in the future. Like, if I can get knight d4, f4, g4, black just has no play. Forever. So, Zhansaya plays knight f5. She's trying to prevent knight d4. Knight e7. Again, a timely trade. A timely trade, because if you play knight e7, maybe I will transfer my queen over here. Maybe I will play rook c5, rook c1. It's a very difficult decision. Maybe I will end up going to d4 after all and trying to get in over here because you removed your knight from the center. Takes on e7. That grants access to the rook now to pressure. Knight h4, knight d4. And we go over here. Okay? And now again, if you run this through machine, it's gonna be like, well, you know, actually Magnus didn't play this perfectly, dude, because, you know, there's like, you know, there's move rook c8 here. And if like rook a6, then like, you know, queen c7, and like I hold the pawn, I can somehow give up e6 because there's queen c2 with counterplay. It's a blitz game. It's a 3-minute blitz game. In classical chess, you know, sure, but it's a blitz game, and it's about creating practical threats, and Magnus ends up transferring his queen over to not get mated, takes the damage to his pawn structure, but black is left with all the weaknesses, and, you know, I really liked how this simplified, again, another layer to the rook endgame. Magnus plays takes, doesn't cash in on any pawn, doesn't take this, and then, like, move his king, like, no, no, he takes, and he's not even a pawn up in a rook endgame, but black is dead just based on activity. Plays e6, so black can't get close, brings his king. He doesn't even move his rook. Just keeps it all there, and now the game is over. You've won the pawn, you have the pawn and the active king. It's all about activity. Simplify at the right moment. Black obviously can't trade. I check you to kick the king out. That's it. Now your rook is glued to the defense of the promotion square, and I just run over to f8, and black resigns. I mean, that couldn't be more clean. It's crazy because, like, he just makes it look so simple. So that takes us to game number 3. Here, this game had a lot of different elements. So first of all, here, this is one of India's newest grandmasters, Leon Mendonca, and he plays c6. So he's trying to get Magnus, like, we have like a London with a c4 and a very early queen b6, no central pawns. This kid came to fight. Like, He's like, I'm going to get Magnus out of his comfort zone. I'm going to get the initiative early. So let's see Magnus stabilize the center. And if you're confused, by the way, why this wasn't taken, the knight is lost. So you can't attack, you know, a fully set position with only 2 pieces. Unless it's like Scholar's Mate. So d5, and now Magnus kicks out the knight. The knight doesn't go. It gets black checks. Little knight trade. But now we have a normal-looking position. We have like a Slav defense right here, except the knights got traded, and white just has a development lead, so of course white is going to play e4. Or not, white is going to play long castle. Magnus castles long, then proceeds to open up his queen and his rook. But he's smart, because he knows that before the bishop and the rook get to the c-file, like this, he's gonna go here, and develop. How's he gonna block everything? Oh, with his knight. And then he's going to play e5. Because the only way that this is going to be dangerous for him is if the position opens. So he keeps it closed. Black develops. Now he moves his king out of the way. And what's funny is that if black castles, you know what Magnus's move would have been here, folks? It would have been g4, h4, and h5. And actually, white is attacking black. White is attacking black, despite having some weaknesses. Now, position's still very complicated. h5, played by Mendonca. f4, bishop g4, rook c1. And here, rather than engaging in a bloody affair, because black has actually done a pretty good job, like, Mendonca played the pawn moves before castling, because he anticipated that something could happen over there. He anticipated something like this. So what does Magnus do? He kind of advances a little bit on the queen side, moves his king out of check, and here, does what he does. Knight e2. Do you know what the point of knight e2 is, folks? Knight g3. He just wants to take the bishop. He just wants to take the bishop wherever it goes. Goes to g4. I will kick it out. And he does. He trades. Black has no good option. If he takes with the e pawn, this is weak forever. And if he takes with this pawn, this is weak forever. So now, boop. Quick rotation. Oh, g3. No queen trade. No queen trade. If we trade queens, this is maybe still okay for white, but okay is the best you're going to get because you just help black solve his problems. What are you doing? Queen f2. You should help your, should help people solve their problems, just not in chess. Takes, 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 takes. And now, just bring it all back. Just bring it all back. And we go and isolate that one weakness. Magnus plays a creative way in the opening, freezes up the position, and then just very, very slowly, look at this, he comes in from both sides, comes to the left, down the middle to the right with his bishop, picks up the pawn, trades, but Levy, he undoubled his opponent's structure. You're helping your opponent. Now, because this is now a weakness, and your pawn imbalance will allow you to infiltrate on the light squares over here. We've talked about these complexes, right? So he just backs up. Now he trades. You said, Levy, you said not to trade earlier. Right. I said not to trade queens because the queen on black side was going to be used as a target to then win the pawn. In this case, you have a bishop versus knight with an extra pawn, and all of your opponent's pawns are on the same color as your bishop. That's amazing. This is a perfect endgame. He brings his king, just like last game, cuts off the knight. Now the only way to get you out is going to play a6. And if you play a6, all your dark squares are weak. Right? So now you got to play b6, but now your a-pawn's weak again. And now the knight can't move. So I just play h4. No, Mendonca plays here, and he takes care of the weaknesses. I'm right back there, buddy. Not getting anywhere. a3, and now your knight gets trapped. So he didn't have to do that. He could have, like, went here and tried to go here. But you know how Magnus would have won this game? On this side of the board. Because after something like this, like let's just say black tries to pass moves, like knight b7, knight d8 forever, I will go here. You cannot prevent me from going to b5, and then you cannot prevent me from taking your pawn, and then I will promote my a-pawn. So I also can at any moment just sneak around that way and get you from, this side. So very nice game for Magnus. This went on for a little longer, actually. Mendonca didn't resign. He didn't trust that Magnus would actually be able to win this endgame. It's not every day you get to play, maybe he was also trying to beat him on time. I don't know how much time Magnus had. Totally viable if you're playing a 3-minute game, but here he resigned because he expected that the world champion would be able to defeat him with an extra 13 points of material, and he chose not to continue the game. Now, the last 3 games are going to be Magnus Carlsen not beating his opponents, and if you skipped ahead to this moment, what are you doing? Go back and watch the rest of the video. I need the ad revenue, and second of all, these games were great, so yeah, I don't know why you would skip ahead. First game against Vincent Keimer. This is one of the prodigies of Germany. Very, very strong player. They played in Grenke, a tournament that I covered in 2019. That was a very long game that ended up with Magnus winning, but it was equal for a long time. Nimso Indian. Magnus chooses to play a3 and then play f3. This is kind of poopy. It's normal, but it's a little poopy because it's just very slow. And if black takes the full center, let's put it this way. In the hands of Magnus Carlsen, no opening is poopy. But I would never recommend one of my students plays like this for white because it's just so difficult to play in a lack of space position where you have long-term prospects of expanding with very small pawn breaks. But he's Magnus, so he could do what he wants. Plays e4, plays knight e2, plays knight g3. Like, what are you doing? Like, what is this? Right? But he's Magnus, so he could do it, right? So e5, very normal. Black traded off the dark squared bishop, puts a bunch of things on dark squares. Now, Magnus plays takes, and trades the queens. And I guess his point is that I have d5, so in the future I will go boop, and boop, and boop, and boop, which totally understandable. But black has no weaknesses. I mean, black will play b6. Like, black is completely fine. So b6 and bishop a6. And this is very standard in the Nimso to take care of your opponent's c4 pawn. You trade like this, even if it means losing the bishop pair, which in this case it has. And you'll notice that, well, Keimer's doing exactly that. They both move their kings out of the way, and now it's going to be an arms race for the d-file. So Magnus plays knight d5 with check, looking to solve his problem like this. So, of course, Keimer doesn't help him solve his problem. But that results in a damaging of his own structure, right? So he's going to have this double pawn. He trades rooks, and then he takes back, and this is weak. And if Magnus can play like h4 and h5, he will be very happy. But the thing is, if Magnus were to play h4, Keimer's best move would not be to allow h5. Although, folks, lost in all of this, can we just like address something? Lost in all this is just the c4 pawn. Like, it's just going to be lost. So he plays this. That allows Keimer to get just a clean pawn up position versus Magnus. Keimer's completely winning here. But his opponent is Magnus Carlsen, in case you've forgotten. And Magnus just defends stubbornly. He plays bishop back to c1, a5. Also, you know, I can't speak for Keimer. I know that I personally would get quite nervous if I was just totally winning versus Magnus Carlsen. And you see Keimer kind of backing up, targeting the pawns. I mean, this literally could not get any worse for Magnus. Down a pawn with 3 pawn islands. 3 pawn islands. So bishop back to f3, he defends the position. Bishop slides into b3. g4, bishop c2. I mean, how is Magnus just barely hanging on here? Everything looks to be falling apart. But one thing for Keimer, why is he playing without a rook? Dude, it's move 30. Move your rook. Move your rook. Vincent, you have a rook. Oh, thank you. Except he moved it in a passive way. Like, now it's a defender. I mean, it should be over here somewhere. Right? Okay, by the way, that's just the free pawn. Like, that is ready to be taken. Okay, so what I would do now is I would play knight h3, knight f4. Okay, bishop e6 is fine. Rook g2. Now I would play knight h3, knight f4. Okay, bishop... I don't know what that does. Oh! Now I know what it does. But you're just too slow. Okay, oh, but the bishop can guard both. It's not a super simple position. You would think, oh, b5 and bam, bam, make a queen! Actually, no, that results in counterplay immediately. So you actually just give your opponent some activity if you try to play this too quickly. And keep that in mind, because you're going to see knight h3, knight f4, there it is. Somehow Magnus just sat back and defended everything, and all of a sudden started turning Vincent's dark square targets against him. Even in the face of total adversity, because Keimer has all his pawns on the same color bishop as this lurking guy over here, right? Right, so knight h3. Now we have to go back to g5. Of course, this would be a lot different in a classical game, but so here, and Keimer basically was like, I've had enough, let's make a draw after it takes, and bishop takes c5. Except actually after rook d7, Keimer loses the game. He doesn't, but he could have. How? Very nice move. Very nice move. I mean, you can think this nice move. c4. Rook takes results in a check and the loss of a rook anyway. And if bishop here, you have this. And bishop b5, you take the bishop. I mean, you can take both, I guess, but bishop is a lot better. And then you're just up a rook. But, you know, Magnus sat back and got tortured for a while in this game, so they just decided to repeat moves. All right, I don't think they repeated moves. I think they took a draw. Really nice game from Keimer. Kind of an opening experiment gone completely wrong from Magnus, but okay, I mean, that's what happens when, you know, you play good players. They're going to play, you know, they're going to guard everything, right? So, right, so here we have this kind of situation with c4, c3, and that's why Keimer was able to get this nice attack. Now, that brings us to the 2 games that Magnus Carlsen actually lost. And the first one is against the Wonder Liang, who's he's a very, very strong junior player. I don't know at what point when does your prodigy status run out in chess? Like, I think a Wonder is like 17, you know? Can you just be a strong 17-year-old grandmaster with like high, you know, high aspirations? Like, when do you stop being a prodigy? I don't know if he's a prodigy anymore. I feel like if you're like 14, 13, then you're a prodigy. But anyway, very good player. I've played him. I got lucky. I got to beat him before he was a grandmaster. And then I think since then he's beaten me twice. So we have a King's Indian attack from Magnus. And Liang breaks the symmetry. He plays c5. Now we have knight b to d2. Knight c6, e4, so like the totally standard King's Indian attack position. And basically what white will want to do in some of these cases is either play c3, a4, as Magnus does in this game, and transfer things over here and get, you know, some winning attack. Okay, so b6, e5, punishing the opening of this diagonal, the hidden opening of this diagonal. We have takes. We have takes. And Liang here can play the very simple bishop to b7 and just kind of be solid. But he sacrifices his rook. And this is a very common idea when the light-squared bishop that's fianchettoed has to go take a rook. It's actually extremely common to get a position that looks like this, where white loses completely the light-squared attacker, defender, everybody, light-squared, lighthouse over there. And here, probably, Liang had to play, like, his rook to the middle or his knight to d5 to open up his bishop. Instead, he did this, and this is just a mistake after knight e5. But his logic was that, okay, even though I'm also losing my light-squared bishop, I have an attack. And even if this is Magnus Carlsen, this attack is not so simple to stop, because my bishop will come to d4 with pressure. Not so simple. Computer's sitting here like +2, positions, +2. But immediately, I mean, queen e2 is the best move. Bishop d4, rook f1. So Magnus finds the correct defensive coordination. Rook d8. And now c3 to kick the bishop out. Bishop leaves. Magnus plays king g2, which the computer doesn't like. The computer likes bishop f4, which looks like it just allows g5. But then you would play h3. It's like, how does that make any sense? Knight h6, now the bishop is hanging in this. Yeah, bishop c7. Attacking the rook, and then when the rook counterattacks, well, then you don't move. Then you go here, hitting the queen away, and then you go back. And this is your perfect defensive coordination. That is why computers are so scummy, because they're like, it's +2.5, but only if you find this really ridiculous sequence of moves. Like, no one's finding that. Bishop, pawn, and then bishop back. Like, stop. No one's finding that. Magnus plays king g2, giving away d3, but now Liang's attack looks like it makes sense, because he has 4 attacking pieces, all targeting this. I mean, this rook on a1's a drunk. That guy just fell asleep. He didn't show up for battle. So knight back to c6, rook d1, he's coming in, but c4, just in time, holding it all together. Takes, queen e4, no queen trade. Queen comes back to d3. Magnus has done a good job here of, of holding everything. So here, g5, bishop to e3, knight e5, queen e4, queen d7. And you say, well, I don't understand. Magnus is completely winning here. How is this video going to be a victory for Liang? Well, just wait. Basically, Magnus is down a little bit on time at this point. It's no bonus time. So he's got to finish the game off. Because he burned a lot of time trying to defend the position, he now has to win this. It's rook versus knight. They both have 6 pawns. Magnus is trying. He's trying. But Liang is just not trading pieces, just defending every threat, defending against queen f6. He has a little cocoon house built around his king. Like, look at this shelter. And he's just going to beat Magnus on time. If Magnus... Oh, queen d2. Okay, I'm just going back. He could take on a4. But that's a bit... I mean, that's hard to do when your queen needs to stay back and defend everybody. So instead he goes back, queen e5 check, queen e7, and Magnus is just, he's not catching up on the clock. Knight e5. And by the way, I think after king c2, there's a really nice defensive move here for black. Knight c4. Knights are so tricky in blitz. Like, you should just never resign if there's a knight on the board. Knight e3 is threatened, and if you take, there's this. So... Knight e3 is threatened along with this move, so just don't resign as long as knights are on the board. A bunch of mistakes take place now because both sides have no time. We now have a queen endgame. Liang picks up another pawn, avoids a draw by repetition, and ultimately results in a drawn endgame, but in this position, the game ends. And I think Magnus Carlsen lost on time. Levy, I want a refund! That wasn't good. He didn't beat him. He was losing. It's A. Blitz is about, you don't get salty when you get flagged in Blitz. It's very important. You signed up to play 3-minute, right? You have to make the best move that you can in an efficient use of time. If you play all the best moves but lose by a minute on the clock, you weren't efficient. That's the whole skill in Blitz. Can't be, don't hate the player, hate the game. And that brings me to my last game. In this game, this was a good game. This was not a flag. So Nihal Sarin, the pride of India, he's going to be playing in the World Cup. Plays a Rue Lopez, d3, d6. And people who play d6 in the Rue Lopez, when they understand that white is not going to play c3, d4, are actually trying in many cases to turn this into a King's Indian. It's not quite a King's Indian, but it's a King's Indian pawn structure. D6, G6, Bishop G7, and you can do that. We have a very imbalanced position. And here Nihal plays the move Knight D7, which is already very peculiar, but the thing is that if you play Bishop to E6, which looks natural, I'll drop my Knight into D5, I mean, I'll play Bishop E3, there's a lot of ways to play this position, and Nihal chooses to actually move his Knight out of the center to lock in on D4 and drop his Knight in first. So now if Magnus were to do it, he would say, what are you doing? Get out. Magnus would say, oh damn, I already moved my pawn too far. So bishop takes, E takes, bishop takes D7, and a very nice in-between move here from Nihal, D takes C3. So now after this move, there's this move. Oops. The little E pawn that made it to the other side of the board. Rook B1, Rook C8. Magnus Carlsen is down a pawn. D4, trying to block it all up. Now how do you reactivate this bishop? What the heck does that mean? Well, that's easy. You just go here. No! You can reactivate pieces without moving them. What the heck am I talking about? C5! Pawn break. Right? Because now you gotta activate a bishop again. There you go. Magnus takes on B7. Nihal takes on C4. Nihal's pawn up. Now, he's pawn up, but okay, his pawns are a little bit stupid looking. A6 is a bit weak. The rook is infiltrated like this. And we've got a knight versus bishop situation. So the knight has no say. I'm sorry, the bishop has no say on the light squares. The knight will fight on both complexes. The knight needs to reroute to, you know, block the light squares and fight for the dark squares by standing on a light square. That's the beautiful thing about a knight. Bishop doesn't see half the board. Guy got like an eye poked out or something, right? So queen b3, rook c3, queen a4, Magnus is just vibing. Now here, Nihal Sarin plays the best move. Sometimes it is required in a game of chess to part ways with material. Sometimes we teach all beginners, rook is not worth as much as a knight. Rook is not worth as much. Sorry, a knight is not worth as much as a rook. Oh my god. Speak better. Rook takes f3. Except in rare cases, where the queen comes in. You see, this is why a wonder didn't want to bring his queen away from his king last game. Because when it's queen and king alone in a room, I mean, you know, we need to raise the level of what's it for the audience, the movie restriction. I mean, it's PG-13 or rated R. I mean, this is gonna get really bad. Now here, there's an option to repeat moves. There's an option to repeat moves! And Nihal breaks that option after queen f4, king g2 by playing this move. And the craziest thing is, right around here, they have the same amount of time. Right here, Nihal has 36 seconds. He burnt like 40 seconds deciding like, do I take the draw against Magnus or do I play this for a win? He plays bishop to e5. It would have been better to play bishop e5 here. Because, if something like rook d1, which is exactly what happens in the game, then you can get the same position, but I believe in this case it's like a difference of a move. Like, I think the way it happens in the game, Magnus has a defense. He does, yes. Excuse me. In the game, Magnus plays this, but Magnus could have defended here with rook h1. This would have been the best move, just, you know, in an ugly way preventing this, and trying to, like, come back and trade queens or something. But because Magnus in the game played rook d1, it became the same exact thing. And now, again, the best move. Sometimes you need to part ways with your king's defender. Just trust that your king is safe. The aggressive queen... And by the way, you see how they stay patient? The aggressive queen is defending the only weak spot. So queen d7, queen f7 is nothing. Queen d7, queen f7 is nothing. And now the rook comes in. You can give some checks, but king just goes to g7. And the threat here is queen h2, queen f2 mate. So we have this. Magnus decides to bail out, and now Magnus Carlsen, if you were mad about the flag of last game, Magnus Carlsen is trying to flag Nihal Sarin. Nihal Sarin's got 20 seconds on the clock. F4, trying to catch him with a pre-move. Rook d4. Now rook c4, trying to give him some checks. Whoa, Levy, I thought you said there wouldn't be a flag. I mean, I didn't say anything. Nihal has to win this game. Nihal's got about 15 seconds on the clock. Rook to a4, bishop takes d6 check. Gotta keep my a-pawn. A-pawn's the biggest asset, because it's the one that's guaranteed that it's going to promote. Rook trade? Nah. Okay, bishop to b4, I'm gonna push my pawn. Push my pawn. Rook to b7, okay, I gotta move my bishop. And here Nihal finds the most impressive tactic in all of this sequence, rook to e3. If you take bishop check on c5, and I pick up the rook, so Magnus doesn't do that. Rook g3. forces the king over there. Now rook comes back. Rook comes back because my goal is to mate you if your king gets stuck over here. So you go here, now I take. Here, here, here. And in the end, Magnus catches... Magnus gets caught, I should say. Rook c5 by moving his king and trying to flag Nihal, bishop c5, and bishop a7. Of course, Magnus would have seen that, but Magnus was pre-moving, trying to beat Nihal on time. And, I mean, of course, this is winning anyway. Like king c4, king b3. I mean, in a game, this would have been, it would have resigned a long time ago. But Nihal Sarin very convincingly defeats Magnus, actually. Very, I mean, it was just ultimately, the game was actually kind of decided by a skirmish in the middle here, where Magnus decided to take, which was inaccurate. And instead, I mean, he could have played this in a lot of ways. He could have played like bishop takes first and maybe tried to expand on the queen side. But in this position already, if he plays knight e2, position is just not pleasant for white. White does not have any space advantage in the center whatsoever. And if this bishop doesn't trade for the knight, like if the bishop comes here, what is this? This is like, you know, renting an apartment in a beautiful luxury building with like a gym and everything, but there's no window. There's not a single window in the entire building. You just can't look outside. So you got the amenities, but like, what are you doing? Right? So anyway, folks, at the end, I told you I would show you the full standings. I mean, I showed you some of the best games that I thought there were. These were the final standings. Magnus went 19.5 and 2.5. So he played 20 Prodigies and he played two coaches. He played 2 coaches. And yeah, I mean, a lot of these players, feel free to look them up if you're interested. Vaishali is, I believe, the sister of Prag. So Praggnanandhaa Rameshbabu, he's also one of the best players of India, youth players of India. Carissa Yip from the United States. Also, Christopher Yu is here from the United States. Awonder Liang is here from the United States. A lot of Iranian players, Belarusian players, Chinese players, Ukrainian players, Indian, Denmark, Germany. Well, Norway's Magnus. I think I just named every country on there. Kazakhstan. Well, I mean, Russia doesn't need... I mean, Russia's Russia, though. So, anyway, thought I would make this fun little video. Not a little video, it's 37 minutes long, but as always, if you manage to persevere through all the content, I mean, I know it's long, but if you manage to make it this far, I do appreciate you very much, and if there's anything that you'd like me to cover in future content, do let me know. Till next time, peace out, y'all. Get out of here.